It's strange how betrayal can come from your own family. The slap wasn't what broke me. I stood there, trembling but unbroken, the sting of my son's hand still burning across my cheek. His daughter watched with eyes that saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to inherit. In that moment, the roses outside my window, once symbols of peace, felt like witnesses to my betrayal. My son wanted my home, the one my husband and I built with our hands, with years of sacrifice and laughter. And his daughter, my own granddaughter, stood beside him, watching like it was her birthright. I never thought I would have to defend that home from my own blood. But what they didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was that the quiet woman they thought they could break had already begun to fight back, and I would make sure they'd never forget it. Before we continue with the story, comment where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to get more uplifting stories about women that have been betrayed and mistreated by family members, but still got back on their feet with a happy ending. Now back to our story. It began in the garden, my sanctuary, the only place that still felt untouched by time or sorrow. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and late spring, and the roses my husband planted years ago were beginning to bloom again. I remember how the sunlight caught the edges of their petals, making them look almost alive. I was trimming the dead stems when I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. Daniel's voice broke the quiet. "You should sign the house over, Mom. It's time. Lila needs stability." At first, I thought I'd misheard him. I straightened slowly, pulling off my gardening gloves one finger at a time, searching his face for the warmth I used to know. But his expression was cold, firm, like this was a conversation rehearsed long before I was invited into it. Lila stood beside him, silent, her eyes sharp and unflinching. There was no kindness in them, only the easy confidence of someone who thought she already owned what she was asking for. I tried to laugh it off, to make sense of it. "Sign the house over," I repeated softly. "You can't be serious." Daniel didn't even blink. "It makes sense, Mom. You don't need all this space. Lila can help with upkeep. It's for her future." His words were measured, calm, too calm. Every syllable was a transaction. And that's when I saw it, the truth hidden behind the polite tone. This wasn't about care or stability. This was about ownership. My home, the one Thomas and I built with our hands and our dreams, had become an asset in their eyes, a prize to be taken rather than a legacy to be cherished. I shook my head. "No, Daniel. I'm not signing anything." The air changed. His jaw tightened. I watched something hard and unfamiliar flicker across his face, a flash of anger that frightened me more than I'd like to admit. Then, before I could take a step back, his hand came across my face. The sound was sharp, startlingly loud against the quiet hum of the garden. For a moment time stopped. The shears slipped from my hand and hit the soil. I could feel the sting spreading across my cheek, hot and humiliating. But I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just looked at him, my son, and said quietly, "You hit me." He froze, but not with regret. His breathing was heavy, defensive. "You're being difficult," he snapped. "You don't understand how hard this is for Lila." Lila said nothing. She just stared, maybe realizing the performance had gone too far. But the damage was already done. Something inside me shifted, not broken but hardened. The warmth that once filled this garden drained away, leaving only cold resolve. Later I stood in the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The red mark on my cheek was faint, but the lesson was burned in deep. My own son no longer saw me as his mother. I had become a barrier, one he thought he could remove with pressure, with guilt, with violence. I traced the outline of that mark and made myself a promise. I would not end my life in silence. I would not be erased from the home I built. I might have been quiet, but I wasn't weak. That was the moment I stopped being a victim. That was the moment everything began. Months earlier, when Daniel first came back home, it almost felt like grace returning after a storm. He stood on my porch that evening with 2 suitcases, his shirt wrinkled and his eyes hollow from the divorce. For a moment my heart softened. He was my boy again, broken, lost, reaching for safety. "You shouldn't have to do everything alone anymore, Mom," he said, his voice carrying just the right amount of weariness and devotion. I believed him. Foolishly, I believed every word. At first, it was comforting to have company in the house again. He'd join me for dinner, compliment my cooking, and ask how I was managing the finances. "Let me take care of the bills," he insisted one night, his tone gentle but firm. You've done enough. You deserve rest. He smiled, and I felt something like pride, that he wanted to help, that maybe he was becoming the man I'd always hoped he'd be. So I handed over the passwords, the online logins, the checkbook. Just for convenience, I told myself. Just until he got back on his feet. It didn't take long for helping to become controlling. He upgraded my phone plan without asking, closed my old credit card because it had bad rates, and changed the insurance policy because he'd found a better deal. I didn't question it at first. It all sounded so reasonable. But I noticed how the mail started coming in his name instead of mine. I noticed how every time I asked about a bill, he'd say, "Don't worry, I've got it." And yet, somehow, I felt less and less like the woman who'd built this home. When Lila moved in, the house filled with laughter again, the kind that sounds sweet until you listen closely. She called me Nana, hugged me in front of guests, and baked muffins every Sunday. She'd take pictures of us at breakfast and post them online with captions like, 3 generations under one roof, family first. I smiled in those pictures, but deep down I felt something tightening in my chest. They were building an image, not a home. The first time I knew for certain was a Thursday night. I'd gone to the kitchen for a glass of water and heard her voice from the hallway, low but sharp. She was on the phone, laughing. "It's basically mine already," she said. "She's too soft to fight. Just a matter of time." Something in me went still. I didn't confront her. I just went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wallpaper Thomas and I had chosen 30 years ago. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. Instead, I reached for an empty notebook from the drawer, opened to the first page, and wrote the date at the top. That was the night I began recording everything. The bills, the transfers, the new accounts, the misplaced letters. Every smile, every lie, every moment they treated my life like a waiting room. They thought I was soft. They mistook my quiet for surrender. But I wasn't soft anymore. I was patient. And I was writing my way to justice. Lila's transformation from polite granddaughter to presumptive homeowner happened almost overnight. At first, she played the role of sweetness, soft smiles, "Thank you, Nana," and those staged hugs whenever a phone camera was nearby. But soon the performance shifted. One morning, I overheard her leading a group of friends through my home. Her tone light and confident, like a realtor closing a deal. "This will be my meditation room," she said, standing in what used to be Thomas's study. My breath caught when I heard her voice echo against the walls he'd paneled by hand. The old oak desk he'd built from scratch still stood in the corner, the one he used to write at late into the night, covered in sketches and love notes he never thought I saw. And now this child, this stranger with my blood, stood there planning its demolition. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't even enter the room. Instead, I stood in the hallway and watched quietly, a ghost in my own home. Every word she spoke, every careless laugh, every entitled gesture went into my notebook later that night. I wasn't powerless. I was patient. The change in Daniel came next. He replaced the front door locks without warning. I discovered it when I returned from a walk and my key wouldn't turn. For a moment, I thought it was just rust or age. But when I asked, he waved it off casually. "It's for security," he said. "You'll get a copy later." Later. Then, as if to punctuate the insult, he added, "Try not to be underfoot when Lila's friends are over." Underfoot. The word stung like the slap all over again. A subtle eviction dressed as courtesy. I realized then that they weren't just ungrateful. They were planning my removal. Not with moving trucks or shouting matches, but with quiet, deliberate steps that stripped me of ownership inch by inch. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, the air felt colder than usual. My teacup trembled slightly in my hand, not from fear but from clarity. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They thought I'd fade into compliance. But they didn't know that beneath my calm lived a woman who had survived loss, who had buried her husband and still tended to the roses he planted. The next morning I rose early and drove to the town records office. The young clerk, Eric, greeted me with a polite smile. I told him I wanted to see the deed to my property, both the current version and the original from the year Thomas and I bought the house. He printed them without hesitation, sliding the papers across the counter. There it was, right in the fine print, the safeguard Thomas had left me. No transfer of ownership without my explicit, notarized consent. Without my signature they could do nothing. My home was untouchable. I smiled, thanked Eric and made 3 copies. One for my purse, one for the safe, and one tucked quietly inside the back of my notebook. I left that office with a calm so sharp it felt like armor. They thought they were pushing me out, but I had just found my foundation. The next step in my quiet war began at the bank, a place I'd visited 100 times before, but never with my stomach so tight. The morning was gray, heavy with rain, and the sky mirrored the way I felt, still but ready to break. Marcy was behind the counter, just as she'd been for decades. We'd gone to school together, shared coffee after church, traded recipes and gossip over the years. When she saw me walk in, she smiled, that familiar, genuine warmth she carried even through bad weather. "Evelyn," she said, waving me over. But when she saw my expression, her smile faded. "What's wrong, honey?" "I need to see my accounts," I said softly. "All of them. Every transaction. Please." She didn't ask why. She just nodded and led me to her desk in the back. The clicking of her keyboard filled the silence, each keystroke another thread pulling tighter around my chest. Then her brows furrowed. "These withdrawals," she began carefully. "Do you recognize them?" I leaned in. The list of transfers filled the screen, neat lines of theft disguised as routine movement. Joint account, one read. Shared maintenance, another. Daniel's name was everywhere. He had drained my savings bit by bit, wrapping his greed in the language of responsibility. It was my money, Thomas's money, the life we'd built penny by penny over 40 years. Marcy looked at me cautiously, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you want me to flag this?" I met her eyes and nodded once. "Yes," I said, quietly. She printed the records, slid them across the desk, and I tucked them into my folder with the same care I used to handle my rose petals. Evidence. Proof. My lifeline. When I walked out of that bank, the wind had picked up, scattering the first leaves of early autumn across the parking lot. I stood for a long moment by my car, staring at the papers in my hand, and I realized something simple but devastating. The people I had loved most had been dismantling my life piece by piece, and they thought I was too blind to notice. That night I couldn't sleep. The walls of my house, once so comforting, felt foreign now. Their laughter from down the hall, Lila's sharp, careless giggle, Daniel's low, practiced tone, echoed like ghosts. I moved through the house slowly, touching the edges of furniture, the door frames, the curtains I'd sewn myself. Felt like saying goodbye. By midnight I had packed. My notebook, my deed copies, my documents, the truth, all of it, went into a single leather bag. I added a small framed picture of Thomas from the living room mantel. Then I stood by the door and took one last look around the home we had built together. "Not like this," I whispered. "You won't take it from me like this." Before dawn I left. No note, no noise, just the hum of the car engine breaking the stillness. I drove north, the road empty except for the early trucks. By sunrise I reached Rose's house. My cousin, the one person I knew I could trust. She didn't ask why I was there, she just opened the door, hugged me once and said, "You're safe now." From her guest room I called Alan Weber, the lawyer a friend had recommended. My voice didn't shake as I told him everything. The forged papers, the manipulation, the slap. He listened, patient and steady, then said words that changed everything. "You have evidence, Evelyn. And that means you have power." Within days, Alan filed for an emergency injunction. The court froze my property. Legally, no one could sell, remodel, or move a single brick without my consent. Daniel and Lila thought I had run away. But I hadn't. I was just sharpening my silence. I was rearming. It was a quiet morning when it happened, the kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath before a storm. I had just finished my coffee at Rose's kitchen table when her phone buzzed. She glanced down, then looked at me with a raised brow. "You might want to see this," she said, turning the screen my way. There, in full color, was a picture of my front gate, plastered across Lila's social media. The caption read, "New beginnings, Cherry Blossom so excited to start this chapter." Behind her in the photo, I could see the moving truck parked on my gravel drive, its rear door wide open, stacked with boxes labeled bedroom, kitchen, and office. My office, my home, my life. But she didn't know what was waiting for her. By the time that photo went live, Alan had already filed the injunction and the county clerk had sealed it. My property was protected, frozen, locked in my name. No renovation, no sale, no change of ownership could take place. Not without my consent. I imagined the moment she arrived at the gate, sunlight catching her hair, her friends laughing, helping her unload her dreams of conquest. Then that sharp pause. The laughter fading as her eyes caught the paper taped neatly to the metal gate. Notice of injunction, the heading read in bold. Unauthorized entry or modification of property is a criminal offense under state law. She must have read it twice. Maybe 3 times. Maybe one of her friends tried to brush it off, saying it was nothing. But eventually, she would have realized it meant exactly what it said. That house wasn't hers. It wasn't Daniel's. It was mine. The moving van left full. Hours later my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. His voice came sharp at first, simmering with rage. "What did you do, Mom?" he spat. "You embarrassed her. You embarrassed us." I stayed calm. "You drained my accounts, changed my locks, and tried to evict me," I said evenly. "You call that helping?" He hesitated, his anger faltering. "It wasn't like that. Look, I have power of attorney. You signed it yourself." That was when I smiled. Not out of amusement, but out of something colder. "The document you forged," I said quietly. "The one with no witness, no notary, no legal standing. It has no weight, Daniel. It's as empty as your excuses." For the first time he didn't have a response. Just breathing. Slow, unsteady. I could almost hear the realization sinking in. A few days later, Alan called to say he'd arranged my return. "You won't go alone," he said. "There'll be an officer with us." Standard procedure. When we arrived, the scene was almost surreal. My own living room had become a showroom of arrogance. Lila and her friends stood inside, laughing, holding notebooks and measuring tape. One of them gestured toward the fireplace, the one Thomas built brick by brick, and said, "We could gut this wall, open it up." Alan stepped forward, calm as ever, while the officer unfolded the injunction. His voice carried through the house, firm but controlled. "This property is under legal protection. You are required to vacate immediately." Lila's smile finally cracked. "You can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. I took one slow step forward, meeting her eyes. "This is my house," I said softly, each word deliberate. "And you tried to take it with a smile and a pen." Daniel's face drained of color. His mouth opened, searching for a defense, but there was nothing left to say. They had overplayed their hand, and I had answered with law instead of anger. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply watched as they gathered their things under the officer's watchful eye. For the first time in months, I breathed freely in my own home again. They thought silence meant surrender. But I had been silent because I was building the truth. One document, one signature, one consequence at a time. Court came faster than I'd expected, though I suppose justice, when built on evidence, doesn't drag its feet. The hearing was set for Monday morning. Gray sky, brisk air, the kind that bites a little and reminds you you're still alive. I sat behind my lawyer, Alan, watching Daniel and Lila on the opposite side of the room. They looked smaller than I remembered, nervous, whispering to each other. I didn't feel anger anymore, only finality. When the judge entered, the room stilled. He began reading through the documentation Alan had submitted. The unauthorized bank transfers, the lock changes, the fabricated paperwork, the social media posts where Lila had called my home our house. Each piece of evidence told a story they tried to control but I had quietly rewritten. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly. My palms were steady as I placed them on the wooden rail before me. "I let my son move back in after his divorce," I began. "He told me I didn't have to be alone anymore. I believed him. I gave him trust, keys, access, everything. And he repaid me by trying to erase me in my own home." The judge watched me closely, his face unreadable. Daniel looked down at his shoes. Lila fidgeted, her confidence finally cracking. "He changed my locks," I continued, "diverted my money, and made me feel like a stranger in the place I built with my husband. I didn't fight with words or violence. I fought with proof. That's why I'm here today." For a moment, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of papers turning. Then the judge spoke, his voice firm. "This court finds that all ownership, authority, and control of the property remains solely with the plaintiff. Furthermore, the defendant's access is hereby revoked, effective immediately. Financial restitution and possible fraud charges are to be reviewed." The gavel struck once. It sounded like a door slamming shut behind me, and another opening. Later that afternoon I returned home. The house felt lighter, as if it had been holding its breath for months and could finally exhale. I walked into the kitchen, where sunlight streamed through the window, catching the dust in soft golden swirls. The dining table sat in its old place. Solid oak, the same table that had held birthday cakes, Thanksgiving turkeys, and every hard conversation of our family's life. I sat down with a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. It was time to rewrite my will. No more sentimentality, no more illusions. Daniel would get nothing. Lila nothing. Not the house, not the savings, not even the furniture they'd already tried to claim. Instead, I decided every dollar, every bit of equity, would go toward a scholarship fund for girls with no safety net. Girls like I once was. Young, scared, underestimated, yet capable of blooming through hardship. The idea steadied me. My legacy wouldn't go to the ungrateful. It would go to the resilient. A week later, an envelope arrived addressed in Lila's careful handwriting. The apology letter. She said she hadn't known everything, that she only wanted a chance to feel safe. Nowhere did she admit the truth, that she'd tried to steal what wasn't hers. I shredded it, each strip falling like confetti over a victory hard-earned. That evening, I went outside with my gardening gloves and a trowel. The front yard was quiet except for the whisper of wind through the trees. I knelt and replanted my roses, not in the back where no one could see them, but right at the front, bold and unhidden. Their roots reached deep, steady and unafraid, just like mine. I didn't just keep my house, kept my sanctuary, and for the first time in years I truly felt home.